Hey guys. Welcome back! Today we're throwing it back to a series on my channel where I repot plants and tell you a little bit of a story. So I'm really excited to get back into this. I used to do these all the time. I should probably take off this bracelet. It's clacking already. Clinking, clacking all over this glass terrarium. I do have a playlist with all of the other videos in this kind of series where I've told stories about some of my retail experiences as well as some of my ghosts, my personal ghost experiences. So that link will be in the description and pinned to the top of the comments. Head there if you have some plant chores, laundry to fold, dishes to do, whatever, that will be down there to listen to, and I hope it's enjoyable to you. So I'm going to be repotting 3 plants and telling you about one of the most, if not the most haunted location in Utah, which is actually a hotel. Before we get into some of the murders, mysterious deaths, and other weird happenings of this hotel, I'm going to tell you about the 3 plants I'll be repotting today. So first, Galaxy Money Tree, which I'll be repotting into this bad boy. This Aescananthus Thai Pink will go into this planter. And then lastly, we'll be repotting this weird Ripsalis fern thing into this little ceramic mug. And I'm really excited to get this repotted and be able to enjoy it a little more because, you know, I hate the way this looks right now. So let's get into it. Today I wanted to tell you about the Lomond Hotel, which is honestly pretty infamous in the area. I think kind of all over Utah as a very well-known, commonly experienced haunted place. The Lomond, or I guess technically it's the Bigelow Hotel, it lives on the corner of 25th Street in Washington, which 25th Street is a very beautiful historic street. If you ever get the opportunity to visit Utah, I highly recommend. I live in the area and it truly is incredibly beautiful. On one end of 25th Street, we have the Union train station, and then a few streets down is the Lomond Hotel. The Union train station is very close to the Lomond Hotel, and it kind of has its own interesting history. The train station, constructed in 1869, became a pretty vital stop on the Transcontinental Railroad. So people were just coming in and out of Ogden, which kind of resulted in 25th Street of Ogden becoming a pretty bustling street. There were a lot of businesses, a lot of places to stay, a lot of people coming and going from this area. So where some people's travel intentions were good and for good reasons, 25th Street did become known for a lot of underground illicit activities, such as gambling dens, a lot of brothels and prostitution. There were corrupt cops, gang activity, illegal bars, because we're talking Prohibition period. It did attract a lot of shadowy, nefarious characters. Growing up, living in the area, it's pretty commonly known that there are underground tunnels connecting the train station all the way to the other side of Ogden. It's said that these tunnels connect all of the businesses on 25th Street underground, so these people could escape if need be, if there was a bust or something in one of the businesses, in one of the sketchy businesses. It's a pretty common story that's told among Ogdenites. Sadly, well, it was sad to me. Ryan, my husband, studied history at Weber State University here in Ogden, and they did a whole thing investigating these underground tunnels, and they don't actually exist. There are just cellars underneath each of these businesses, and at one point some of the business buildings were larger buildings that were separated to individual businesses, buildings, and the cellars of those connected buildings were concreted, bricked up so that the 2 businesses could have their own cellars. So these tunnels don't actually run under the ground, but it's kind of a fun story to tell people. So anyway, with all of these people coming in and out of Ogden, of course there was a big need for places for people to stay, which is where our hotel comes into place. Our hotel, it was built in 1891, first named the Reed Hotel, and this was a hotel for the elite. Very nice, very fancy hotel. It had 5 floors, and you only stayed there if you had some money. It was considered very luxurious, and even now walking in there, you can tell, it's beautiful. It is a beautiful building. I think a big reason that this hotel is so infamous is that the first death actually occurred only 3 days after the grand opening, but this death was actually of natural causes. A 48-year-old man named William Steele, who was a father and savvy businessman, but was also very, very sick, was traveling through the Midwest trying to find a cure for his declining health, which he was very, very sick. He left his family, traveled for weeks in search of a cure for his ailments, but unfortunately after weeks of travel he had no luck and he found himself in Ogden, Utah to celebrate the grand opening of the Reed Hotel with his brother-in-law, one of the hotel managers. So he found himself here during the grand opening, but unfortunately, as we've discussed, just 3 days after that grand opening, he was found passed away in his bed of tuberculosis. But there were a lot of natural deaths that actually occurred in the hotel in this time because tuberculosis was running rampant. And just 3 days after the opening, that's kind of crazy. That's really quick for something to happen. From here, there are quite a few more deaths to follow for all sorts of reasons. One of the most popular, well, popular is not the right word. 30 years later is when one of the most well-known and talked about to this day deaths took place, and it took place on September 26th, 1921, when a man named Asuki Nakano, who was a new hire as a chef for the hotel, clocked in for his shift. He had only been working at the hotel for about a month when this happened. On this day of September 26th, Asuki had clocked into his shift, made his way to the 3rd floor to call for a freight elevator to deliver some things for the kitchen. It's said that Asuki was a little bit distracted by his tasks he had to get done that morning. So when the elevator he called arrived, Asuki, without looking, took a step onto what he thought would be the elevator to grab his freight, and instead he fell 3 floors. The elevator had never arrived. Nearby employees heard the impact of the fall and rushed quickly to help him. He suffered a skull fracture and severe internal injuries, as you can imagine, falling 3 floors like that. I had always heard that he died on impact. As I was kind of doing a little bit of research for this to make sure I was telling you the correct information, I found that he actually didn't die in the hotel at all, and instead he was rushed to D Hospital, where he died just an hour after the fall. It's pretty commonly known that the elevators of this hotel are really weird, and you know, they seem to act on their own accord. My sister actually lived in the hotel for a little while, and she also said that the hotels were really weird, and like sometimes you would call for an elevator and they would never come, or you wouldn't call for an elevator, you'd just be in the area and then all of a sudden an elevator shows up and nobody had called for it, that kind of thing. So yeah, they are pretty weird, and they always have been. This is one of the most experienced, like, strange occurrences of the hotel. What makes it even stranger is, of course, this happened in 1921, and here we are now in, what year is it? 2023. Hotel maintenance has looked into the elevators. The hotel has actually been partially rebuilt once, so of course they looked at the elevators then. They've hired lift engineers that are very, very knowledgeable about elevators, and no problems have ever been found, but this is still a very, very common thing for the elevators to act of their own accord. And of course, people in the area claim that it is Asuki's ghost traveling through the elevators, or maybe some of Asuki's other ghost friends, which of course we're going to get into, but where he didn't actually die in the hotel, that's quite interesting, that his ghost maybe isn't even there. As I said, the Reed Hotel was actually reconstructed in 1927 to meet safety regulations of the time. When they tore down the Reed Hotel, they actually kept the bones of the Reed and then added 7 more floors, something like that, but used the bones of the Reed. So the new elevators act just as oddly as ever. March of 1929, just 2 years after the rebuild, the Utah's Canner Convention was being held in what was now renamed to the Bigelow Hotel. A man named Dan Rowland and a lot of his friends had checked in to the hotel for this conference. One of those friends being Mr. Russell, who I could not find a first name for, and his wife, Lawrence Russell. The Utah Canners Convention got a little bit crazy, as canner conventions do. You know, people were drinking, having a good time, catching up with people that they see at the convention year after year. Mrs. Lawrence was seen staggering around, clearly very highly intoxicated. She had been drinking a lot, and where Dan Rowland had been to this event year after year, he did know a lot of the people attending. So Dan's room on the 12th floor became kind of a meeting point for all of his acquaintances and friends. People would go there to kind of relax, drop their things off, chit chat a little bit before returning to the canning festivities, the party. Let me put some sphagnum moss down here. Because Mrs. Russell was clearly super intoxicated, she needed to lay down and rest. Mr. Russell and Dan brought her up to Dan's room. The details are a bit convoluted, but at some point, some of the guests opened the door to Dan's room to check on Mrs. Lawrence, and they found a man by the name of Edward Spellman on top of Mrs. Russell, clearly taking advantage of her. She was unconscious. She couldn't consent. He was taking advantage of her. With a bunch of people watching, Dan pulled Spellman off of his friend's wife, dragged him out of the room, and attempted to take him down to the lobby where he would go to call the police and tell them what had happened, turn this man in. Oh, I should also say, Dan didn't know this guy. Like I said, his room was just kind of a meeting point for acquaintances, and you know, people know people, they invite the people they know, so they didn't actually know each other. Of course, the journey from the 12th floor to the lobby is quite a task, especially when trying to drag a full-grown, assumably drunk man there with you who doesn't want to go with you. So, you know, multiple fights broke out along the way, and as they got closer and closer, the fights got more and more aggressive, and at one point, Spellman really took it up a notch and was just throwing punches at Dan. Dan hit him back twice, once in the jaw and once in the temple. This caused Spellman's head to fall back and hit the wall, and it actually resulted in his death. And I gotta know what you think of this, but Dan was charged with murder, and later that year, the charge was dismissed. What do you think? So Spellman's ghost is said to roam the hallways. So Spellman is someone that people claim to experience as they walk through the dark hallways at night. Where that one is a true story, this next one, there's absolutely, I couldn't find a single article, a single thing. So this one, I don't know, I gotta know what you think, but this is definitely the most well-known, most commonly told story about the hotel, and it took place in rooms 1101 and 1102. I've heard this story the most out of any other like ghost stories when talking about the hotel, but there truly is no information on it, so take that for what you will. I mean, I think that tells us the validity, but it's still kind of, well, it's not a fun story. It is a good story though. Okay, anyway, let's get into it. So, a newly married couple checked into the honeymoon suite on the 11th floor in room 1102. Of course, you know, this newly married couple were celebrating in this room. They had been drinking, supposedly having a really good time, but the following day, the bride was found drowned in the bathtub of room 1102. The groom at this point, no information on him from here on out. He's just out of the story. He's no longer a part of this. So it's really up to speculation for what happened that night, but yes, maybe she was drinking too much and slipped into the tub water, and the husband left because he was scared of getting in trouble for it, or, you know, maybe it was an intentional murder. Who knows? Who knows? Since the groom is no longer a part of the story, of course someone has to come and collect this woman's belongings, and that person was her son, who stayed in the room next door, 1101. He was planning to stay in the hotel for a few days. It was a very gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching situation for him to have lost his mother after investigating her room, gathering the belongings, kind of being in the area where his mother had died. He was so overcome with grief and just so distraught by the loss of his mother that the following day he took his own life in the room next door, 1101. People claim that their ghosts still roam the hallways and claim rooms 1101 and 1102. The 11th floor is the most haunted. There are the most hauntings that take place on this floor, but especially in rooms 1101 and 1102. The only detail of this that I could find actual like backup information for was that these rooms were closed for kind of a long time, which maybe tells me that something did happen there. But when these rooms were reopened for guests, Those that have stayed in room 1102 have said that the tub's faucet will randomly turn on, and a few guests have woken in the night to the bathtub just overfilling with water that they didn't turn on. Some claim to have been nudged or pushed by an unseen entity, and others claim to have seen a full-body, unclothed apparition who they believe is the bride and the mother in this story. This is another like kind of true thing that people, well, true, take it with a grain of salt, but it's frequently claimed by hotel staff that even when guests aren't staying in that room, they'll receive calls from room 1102. Usually when the calls are answered, there's just silence. On occasion, a disembodied voice can be heard on the other end. Those that have stayed in room 1101 say that upon stepping into the room, they feel just an immediate sense of dread and sadness and guilt, grief. It's also very commonly stated by 1101 guests that they were woken in the night to the faint sound of pacing footsteps and a very faint male voice sobbing in the corner of their room. That's scary and sad. Those are the most talked about stories from the Ben Lomond Hotel, but there really are so many tragic deaths that have taken place here. People would jump from the 11th story window. And one story, in fact, was that one night, not sure of the year, two men entered the hotel. They didn't say anything to anybody. They didn't say anything to each other, but they entered the hotel, made their way up to the 11th floor, even though hotel staff were trying to stop them because they clearly weren't guests of the hotel. Hotel staff chased after them. The men ran to the 11th floor, and as hotel staff entered the 11th floor hallway, they saw the two men jump from that 11th story window together. I've heard that they were men that didn't even know each other but had lost their jobs, found their way to the Bigelow Hotel, and jumped together. Other common experiences of guests, not necessarily just in like rooms, but it's also not uncommon to randomly be nudged when walking through the hallway, even though nobody's there, being followed by faint footsteps through the hallways and the lobby and the different conference rooms. There's a lot of people are claiming that they were haunted when they were here. I've heard that just wandering the hotel, you will randomly get a whiff of perfume. It's said that this perfume came from a teacher that stayed in the hotel and met her end. You'll just randomly get a whiff of it and then it's gone. Like this teacher's ghost has walked past you, brushed by you. Probably the craziest thing to me that has happened in this hotel is, I'm so sorry, my audio got really messed up, but I did want to tell you a little bit more about this one. So on the night of October 24th, 1976, Henry Topping Jr., who was an employee of the hotel, was actually supposed to have the night off, but was filling in for one of his coworkers. He's working the front desk. A 15-year-old by the name of Johnny Perez entered the hotel and began stabbing Henry. In the end, he ended up stabbing him 44 times, and he ended up stealing $370. He ran, but fortunately, the police caught him, and Johnny ended up being one of the youngest offenders in Utah to be put in adult prison. And I did find the newspaper article for when this happened. It's titled "Youth in Ogden 16 Declared Adult for Stabbing Death Trial." A 16-year-old Ogden youth was ordered Wednesday to stand trial as an adult for the stabbing death of a Ben Lomond hotel night clerk who was knifed 44 times during a robbery. After a 6-hour hearing, 2nd District Juvenile Court decided to certify John Perez as an adult and bound him over to Ogden City Court for a preliminary hearing on the first-degree murder charges. The teenager was arrested last month for the brutal slaying of Henry Topping Jr., 65, who was stabbed repeatedly with a large knife during a robbery at the downtown Ogden hotel. Detectives say they found bloody clothing and part of the estimated $370 stolen from the hotel in the suspect's home at the time of his arrest. Kind of crazy, very sad, and I can't even imagine being the coworker who switched shifts with him. So whether this hotel is actually haunted or not, I think there is something to be said for how many like weird, tragic, random deaths have occurred in the hotel. There are so many, I really could go on. And I think that that is why this hotel has become so infamous. It's not like just, you know, one or two crazy things have happened. There's a lengthy list of strange things that have happened here. It really feels like this hotel just kind of attracts that somehow. And it kind of seems like it has since, you know, day 3 when it opened and the first death took place. The name of the hotel is currently the Bigelow Hotel, but like I said, it was the Reed Bigelow. They changed it to Ben Lomond at some point, and then they changed it back to the Bigelow. It's now a hotel slash like an apartment building. So I don't know, this hotel is very intriguing to me. Very highly interested in it. So those are all of the stories I'm going to tell you today. Let me know what you thought of them, or if you've ever stayed at this hotel or you're in the area and have something to add. I would love to read some comments from those of you that have stayed here, had your own experiences here, have details to add. I will be watching all of the comments, but please let me know what you thought of this. Thumbs up or thumbs down if you like this type of if you liked this type of video or enjoyed it. Yeah, that's really helpful for me to know what to make going forward. Here are our 3 plants. Money tree, Scheffler money tree. I love it in this tall planter. I think it's a really cool looking little combo. Here is the Ascanianthus Thai pink. Looks really cute. Recently thrifted this. And this little weirdo. Oh my gosh, I love it. It's so cool. It's so cool, right? Okay, so that is it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye. Okay, now I gotta clean up. Dang it, the worst part. Okay, bye. Bye. Hope you liked it. Okay, good boy, Biz.